Marianne Foster had never thought a sewing needle could carry so much weight. At 62, with her husband gone for over 20 years, she had learned to make her life both simple and deliberate. A retired elementary school teacher in Eugene, Oregon, Marianne lived quietly, her days filled with gardening, reading, and small sewing projects for neighbors. But nothing she had made in recent years compared to the project that had taken up every evening since the early days of winter, a wedding dress for her only daughter, Clara. The ivory silk had cost her 3 weeks of grocery money. She'd chosen it because it caught the light like still water under the moon. French seams, hand-rolled hems, seed pearls sewn one by one, until her fingertips were rough and tender. All of it was done without complaint because each stitch felt like a conversation with the little girl she once held in her arms. Clara had been 12 when Marianne lost her husband, David, to a sudden heart attack. From then on, it was just the two of them against the world. Marianne remembered sewing her own wedding dress 4 decades ago in a small apartment with second-hand furniture and noisy neighbors. Her mother had taught her how to preserve fine fabrics by wrapping them in acid-free tissue. And Marianne intended to do the same for Clara. It was more than tradition. It was an act of love she could hold in her hands. As she laid the finished gown across the dining table, the pearls caught the morning sunlight in tiny bursts. She ran her fingers down the bodice, feeling the strength of the invisible stitches that would hold through decades if cared for properly. This was not just a garment. It was a love letter written in thread and fabric. Today, Clara would see it for the first time. Marianne imagined her daughter's face lighting up the way it used to when she unwrapped birthday gifts. She pictured Clara running her hands over the silk, marveling at the details, perhaps even tearing up at the thought of wearing something made by her mother's hands. That image had kept Marianne going through late nights and tired eyes. It was the moment she had been dreaming about for 6 months. She slipped the dress into its garment bag, careful not to catch the lace, and took one last look at the dining table, empty now, but full in spirit. The dress was ready. So was she. The Fairmont Regency Hotel stood like a palace against the gray Oregon sky, all gleaming stone and polished brass. Marianne pulled into the valet line, feeling the kind of unease that came from stepping into a world she didn't belong to. The parking fee alone was more than she spent on groceries in a week. But this was Clara's wedding day, or at least the day before, and Marianne had told herself she could blend in for a few hours. Inside the bridal suite, the air buzzed with expensive perfume and a quiet urgency. Amanda Keene, Clara's future mother-in-law, was at the center of it all, directing a small army of stylists, photographers, and florists, as if she were conducting a symphony. Her every gesture was sharp, efficient, and rehearsed. Clara sat in front of a wide vanity, her hair being coaxed into glossy perfection by a stylist whose assurers gleamed like surgical tools. Layers of makeup were applied by another professional, each brushstroke erasing the freckles Marianne remembered from her daughter's childhood. She looked beautiful, yes, but not entirely like herself. "Mom, you're here," Clara said, her voice polite but distracted. "We're almost ready for the dress." Marianne smiled, lifting the garment bag with both hands as if it were a sacred object. She unzipped it slowly, letting the silk catch the room's soft lighting. For a moment, the chatter died. Even Amanda's clipboard lowered an inch. Then Amanda stepped forward. her gaze scanning the gown like a jeweler appraising a flawed diamond. "Oh, that dress you made," she said, her tone carrying the weight of something she wished she didn't have to acknowledge. "How thoughtful." Marianne's hands hesitated at the hanger. Thoughtful. The word landed like a pebble in her stomach. "It's very handmade," Amanda continued, lips curling into something that might have been a smile. "Quite rustic." Rustic. 6 months of work dismissed in a single breath. Clara's eyes darted between Amanda and the dress. "Mom, maybe we should go with the other option," she said softly. "The varang from the boutique. It's more fitting for the venue." Marianne folded the dress back into its tissue paper, each movement precise. The way she'd learned to handle delicate things. "Of course," she said evenly. "Whatever makes you happy." As she stepped into the hallway, the door behind her remained ajar just enough for voices to spill through. "Thank God you came to your senses," Amanda said. "Can you imagine the photographs? People would wonder where on earth that dress came from." Clara laughed lightly. "If anyone asks, I'll just say it didn't fit. It looks like something from a thrift store." Anyway, the word struck harder than Marianne expected. She clutched the garment bag to her chest, feeling something inside her shift not break. But change forever. Marianne drove home with the dress lying across the back seat like a sleeping child. The hum of the highway was steady, but her thoughts refused to settle. By the time she unlocked her front door, the shock had cooled into something quieter, a clear, cold understanding. She spread the gown across her dining table once more, smoothing the silk with hands that remembered every hour spent making it. In the afternoon light, the pearls glimmered like constellations. This wasn't a thrift store dress. It was art. It was love, tangible and deliberate. The doorbell rang just as she was pouring hot water into her cup. Through the peephole, she saw a young woman holding a covered casserole dish. When Marianne opened the door, the woman's face brightened. "Mrs. Foster." "I'm Sophie Martinez," she said. "I used to know Clara. We worked together at a coffee shop years ago." "I heard." "Well, I heard you might need some company today." Marianne hesitated, but something in Sophie's earnest expression invited trust. "Come in," she said. Sophie stepped inside and stopped short, her gaze locking on the gown. "Is that the dress?" Marianne nodded. "I made it for Clara." Sophie approached slowly, her fingertips hovering over the silk. "This is extraordinary. The beadwork alone. You could see this in a couch or showroom. How long did it take?" 6 months, Marianne replied. Sophie's eyes flashed. 6 months of work and she didn't wear it. That's unforgivable. Marianne gave a small shrug. It's hers to choose. "Maybe so," Sophie said, "but I know someone who would cherish this." She explained that her cousin Emily was getting married in 3 months. Emily worked as a social worker. Her fiancé taught kindergarten. Their wedding budget barely covered the basics, and Emily had been looking at polyester gowns online, none of which brought her joy. Would she even want to wear a dress that was made for someone else? Marianne asked. "I think she'd cry with gratitude," Sophie said. "She's about Clara's size, maybe a bit taller." That afternoon, Sophie returned with Emily. The moment Emily saw the dress, she froze. Her hands trembled when she finally touched the fabric. "I can't. This is too beautiful," she whispered. Try it on, Marianne urged. 20 minutes later, Emily stood in front of the mirror, transformed. The gown fit as if it had been made for her. And in that reflection, Marianne saw something she hadn't in a long time. Her work. Honored as it deserved to be. Sophie couldn't stop grinning as she snapped a photo of Emily in the dress. The silk draped like liquid over her figure, the pearl catching the light in delicate bursts. Emily's smile was radiant. Her posture changed. She carried herself like a bride in the middle of a fairy tale. This has to be shared, Sophie said already, pulling out her phone. I'm not sure that's Marianne began, but Sophie was already typing a caption. When your cousin can't afford coucher and your friend's mom happens to be a hidden master seamstress, it read, "This gown was hand-sewn over 6 months." By Moran Foster, a retired teacher with a gift the world should see. She added a few hashtags handmade couture, real women were, and hit post. At first, it was just Sophie's circle of friends reacting, but within an hour, comments began to pour in. People wanted to know if Marianne took commissions, brides to be were tagging, friends asking, "Can we find her?" Local seamstresses left messages praising the workmanship. By evening, Sophie's post had been shared dozens of times. By the next morning, it had reached more than 1,000 views. Days later, Marianne's phone rang. The caller introduced herself as a reporter from a Portland news station. She'd seen the photo and wanted to feature Marianne in a segment about local artisans. Marianne hesitated. I don't really do interviews. Mrs. Foster, the reporter said, I've been covering style for 20 years. That gown is museum quality. People should know about your work. That night, Sophie came over with takeout and an idea. You should start a business, she said between bites of pad thee. Custom dresses for real women, not just runway models or people with unlimited budgets. Marianne laughed, shaking her head. I wouldn't even know where to start. I would, Sophie replied. I studied fashion design for a year before life got in the way. I know the suppliers, the process, the people. You've got the skill. I've got the hustle. Moran thought of Herdity, but quiet home, the long evenings spent alone, the years of making herself small to fit other people's expectations. The idea of building something new at her age felt daring, maybe even reckless. But the alternative was to keep folding herself into smaller and smaller spaces. What would we call it? She asked. Sophie's smile widened. Silver thread delier. It sounds like exactly what you do, weaving beauty into something lasting. Miranda rolled the name on her tongue. It felt right. In that moment, she realized she'd already made her choice. 3 months later, the once quiet dining room where Mirani had laid out Clara's dress was now a bustling studio. Bolts of silk leaned in the corner. Pattern pieces hung on the wall. The steady hum of a sewing machine filled the air like music. Silver threadier had a waiting list that stretched into the summer. Brides came in with photographs and dreams and left with something made exactly for them. Women planning milestone anniversaries, retirement galas, even a few theatrical costumes. They all wanted the touch of Marianne's needle. Sophie managed the business side with relentless energy. She set up a simple website, handled scheduling, and even convinced a local photographer to do a free shoot in exchange for credits. Word spread quickly. The TV segment had aired, and a local bridal magazine followed with a 2-page feature calling Marianne Portland's Hidden Coucher. It was in the middle of this whirlwind that Marianne's phone rang. One afternoon, Clara's name lit up the screen. "Mom," Clara said warmly, as if nothing had happened between them. "I saw your interview." "Congratulations." "Thank you," Moran replied, cautious. "I was thinking," Clara continued, "maybe I could help you expand the business. You know, make it more efficient. Use fabrics that are more cost-effective, speed up production so you can take more orders." Marianne's fingers paused on the silk she was cutting. Cost-effective. Well, you can't spend 6 months on a single dress if you want to make real money. You could hire people to do the handwork, switch to synthetic blends, and streamline the designs. Marianne took a slow breath. "This is not about mass production, Clara Ara. Every piece is unique." "I'm just trying to help," Clara said, her voice softening into that careful tone she used when she wanted something. "Mark knows about scaling artisan businesses. He could give you some pointers." Marianne felt the old familiar tug, the instinct to please, to accept guidance, even when it meant compromising her values. But the past months had given her a different kind of confidence. "I appreciate the thought," Marianne said, "but Silver 3 Diller is doing just fine." There was a pause. "Are you sure you don't want to hear our ideas?" "I'm sure," Marianne replied. After she hung up, Marianne stood for a moment in the quiet studio. The shelves of fabric, the soft light from the window, the half-finished gown on the dress, form. All of it reminded her that this space and this work was hers, and she wasn't about to let anyone redefine it for her. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the bell over the studio door chimed. Marianne looked up from the hen she was finishing and saw Clara standing just inside, water droplets clinging to her sleek black coat. She looked out of place in the warm, fabric-filled space like a guest in someone else's home. "Hi, Mom," Clara said, her eyes scanning the studio. "This place is impressive." Marianne set her work aside. "Thank you. Was there something you wanted to discuss?" Clara hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I spoke with the documentary filmmaker who's doing a piece on you. I told her we'd reconciled, that we're closer than ever." Moran's eyebrows lifted. Slightly. "Reconciled?" "Well, yes," Clara said, as if the word itself could make it true, "haven't we?" "Forgiveness isn't something you get to announce on my behalf," Marianne replied calmly. Clara's expression tightened. "So, you're saying you haven't forgiven me for one moment of poor judgment?" "One moment." Marianne's voice stayed even, but her words were deliberate. "Clara, that day was the result of years of you treating me like an afterthought, dismissing my work, assuming your opinion outweighed my own experience." Clara glanced toward the dress forms lined against the wall. "I've apologized. I sent flowers." "You sent flowers to ease your guilt," Marianne said. "Not once did you ask me how I felt or what that dress represented to me." The room was quiet except for the muffled sound of rain against the windows. Clara shifted her weight, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. "I don't know how to fix this," she said finally. "Maybe it doesn't need fixing," Marianne replied. "Maybe it just needs accepting for what it is. We are two adults who happen to be related. If you want more than that, you'll need to show me through your actions that you respect the woman I've become." Clara's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "And if I can't, then you can't," Marianne said simply. "And I won't pretend otherwise." Clara turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Mom." "Goodbye, Clara." The bell chimed again as she left, and the sound felt like the closing of a chapter. Mariana returned to her workable, the needle steady in her hands, the fabric warm beneath her fingers. Some wounds didn't need to be smoothed over. Some needed to be acknowledged and left as they were. 2 days later, Marianne welcomed her favorite kind of client, a woman with astery. Evelyn Harper, 70 years old, wanted a gown for her granddaughter's wedding. She'd searched department stores and online shops, but found only dresses that made her feel invisible. "I don't want to look like I'm in mourning," Evelyn said during the fitting, "but I also don't want to look like I'm trying to be 25 again." Marianne smiled. "Then we'll make something that feels like the very best version of you." The gown they created together was deep sapphire crepe with 3/4 sleeves and an aligned skirt that moved elegantly when Evelyn walked. At the neckline, Marianne added a scattering of hand-sewn beads that caught the light without shouting for attention. When Evelyn stepped in front of the mirror during the final fitting, she placed a hand over her heart. "I look like me," she said softly. "Just more." "That's the goal," Marianne replied. By now, Silver Thread Atelier had become more than a shop. It was a place where women came to be seen, heard, and celebrated. Sophie had organized the schedule, so there was always time for conversation, for listening to the stories behind each garment. The studio walls seemed to hold those stories stitched into every seam. One afternoon, a courier delivered a large envelope. Inside was an invitation to a gala honoring women entrepreneurs over 50 who inspire change. Moran's name was on the list. She stared at it for a long moment, the words blurring slightly. Months earlier, she'd been a retired teacher making a dress in her dining room, trying to please a daughter who thought her work was quaint. Now she was running a thriving business that honored the women who wore her creations and herself. The night of the gala, she wore a gown she had made for herself, dove gray silk with subtle beadwork at the cuffs. She felt comfortable, confident, and entirely her own person. Sophie walked beside her, radiant in a deep burgundy dress they designed together. When Marianne accepted her award, she didn't talk about profit margins or production schedules. She talked about the value of craft, the importance of honoring everybody, and the courage it takes to start over, no matter your age. As she looked out at the audience, she thought of Clara, not with bitterness, but with a steady acceptance. Some relationships heal, and some simply change shape. To anyone who's ever been told they're too old, too late, or too small, she said into the microphone, I hope you pick up the needle anyway. You might just stitch yourself a new life. The applause rose around her, warm and unhurried, the sound of people. Wounder stood. And in that moment, Marianne knew she had sewn more than dresses. She'd swung freedom,